in trying to adopt a new philosophy and make it part of the culture, I think a leader has to evaluate and be successful at knowing when to push and when not to push. In other words, in my position as a superintendent, I had a lot of politics to deal with. A board of trustees, a community, staff, who at various times were at odds. And so I think as a leader, one of the things I had to do was to determine when to press forward and when to back off a little bit. So what the diagram that Monta was talking about talks about is sometimes there are big changes you can make that are good, but they will cause such dysfunction that they won't be successful. So they're really not worth making the change because it will destroy what you're trying to do. So you have to identify those things that will make an impact in changing the system and yet won't cause such turmoil that they can't be successful. So I think one of the roles of a leader is to determine what are those things that are high impact, that don't have a lot of resistance, that will carry your organization forward and transform the culture in the process. And sometimes that's very difficult to do. David talks about grading in a lot of cases. And at one time, we talked about the possibility of doing away with grades to a degree. That is something that is anathema to people in our culture here. And if we had gone forward in trying to do that, we probably would have been stopped dead in our tracks by the politics of the situation. So we backed away from that and looked at how maybe we could get students more involved in understanding grading and doing grading on their own, helping each other evaluate and improve along the way, while still keeping the grade at the end, so that we made an impact on how students view grading and go about the process. And yet we didn't create such a firestorm that everybody said, no, we're not doing that anymore. You all leave and we'll bring some new people in. So I think it's incumbent upon a leader to understand what are those things that are going to be high impact and low resistance. And those are the things that I want to promote in order to further the transformation of the organization. Variation is something that I think we had to spend a lot of time helping people understand, variation in the system. And one of the hardest groups to help understand that is politicians. So it was a very difficult chore with board members and city councils and other political interests in our school district to help them understand that a system is going to have variation in it, no matter what you do. I mean, there are acceptable limits to that variation and unacceptable limits. So in board meetings, I mean, we did some education with our board of trustees and trying to help them understand what continuous improvement was and what the philosophy was and what variation was. And we would have all kinds of arguments about what were acceptable limits of variation. But that didn't come until we got to a point where board members even understood what variation was. And I guess one of the stories I used to help people understand that is had to do with peanut butter sandwiches. What we had was in our cafeteria, if a student didn't have their lunch money for several days in a row, we would allow them to charge up to a certain point. And we didn't want the students to go hungry, so we would give them a peanut butter sandwich and some carrot sticks or celery or something like that, so that they would not go hungry. But at some point, we didn't allow them to charge anymore. But we never let a student go hungry. Well, I had a board member at the time who just thought that policy was absolutely horrendous. And he would bring it up basically at every board meeting and talk about how horrible the policy was and what were we going to do to change it. And after several meetings, finally our board president looked at him and said, well, maybe we need to look at that. And she looked at me and said, how many complaints have you had about the peanut butter sandwich policy? And I said, I've had 2. And both of them were from this gentleman who was the board member. And I remember the president looking at me and saying, I guess we've discussed that enough then. So it really was an identification of a board, except for one member, understanding that you don't change the whole system simply because you have 1 or 2 special causes. And that's very difficult for people to understand, because we really have a culture in that people in power are expected to deal with every special cause that comes down the pipe. And we spend a lot of time as leaders chasing down special causes and trying to rearrange the whole system because of that special cause. All you have to do is look at every legislature, from U.S. Congress to state to board to whatever. That's how we tend to operate. And one of the things you ask, what would I do differently? I guess being more persistent and trying not to allow our organization to spend so much time on special causes. I think variation and understanding variation is one of the key things in that philosophy that we need to remember and to continue to follow and understand.
I don't know how to convey what a subtle but powerful shift this whole journey has been. That it isn't about doing the same things better, because we tried that, and we did that for quite a while. This truly is talking about changing the way that you approach problems, changing the way you interact with students, and a change in the entire culture to one that is constantly focused on learning, constantly focused on improvement. I remember a time early on when we were using a systems improvement, a very simple tool to talk about where we are and what would be happening, in fact, if we had the best system of education. And we were being very silly about it in a way, and say, oh, people would be coming from all over the world, and we couldn't build schools fast enough to deal with all of the growth, because Leander would be a school of choice. It would be some place that we had so many applicants for jobs that we would be turning away people that we wished we didn't have to. And we were laughing about it at the time. We were a very small rural district at the time. And in fact, those things have happened as a result of a shift in culture, a shift of the way that we look at the educational system. To think that I could have spent 30 years of my life trying to make sure that we had the best system for tracking tardies, or that we had the best system for getting students to, well, pick any rule that you want to really to comply, but just to realize this gave me the tools, the strategy, the philosophy to realize that we're about truly empowering students for the future, for greatness, and it's just made a world of difference, just a world of difference. We knew the first thing that we had to do was to learn. And we had to get more information, and truly, I know that the term paradigm shift has become very trite, but it was shaking us to the very core of what it is that we need to do and address as an educational system. So in addition to, we took 40 people, the very first session that we went to, which included teachers and administrators, as well as support people. And I think that was key from the beginning, that we saw this as a whole district approach, that this was not limited to just administration or just teachers, or in fact just the educational part of the district. I think that was key. Then when we began to introduce it to the larger audience, we began to have a great deal of training, but as far as implementation, what you chose to do with it was voluntary. And I think that was a big key, both in terms of weathering through the resistance that always occurs when you are talking about that fundamental change, as well as respecting the pace with which people could accommodate change in their own sphere of influence.
I think my comment to people at the time in kind of public speaking engagements was, I'm not going to force you to do what David is telling us we need to do. But the non-negotiable is we are going to improve. We are going to get better. Here is a way that we can do that, that's tried and true in the business world. And it's something that I think can affect education and help us to improve. So we did that over that year, and we had a lot of converts. Well, not a lot, but we had a significant number of people who really took it on. And then we had another significant number of people who really believed that this was either frivolous or damaging, or was not going to work. It was going to harm the way we worked with students. They were very much clinging to what they knew and how they did things, and wanted to keep doing it just like they did. So we had, two camps of people, and a big group of people in the middle who just said, leave me alone. I'll go on and do what I want to do, and y'all go on and figure out what you want to do.
I joined Leander a long time ago when we were only 2 elementaries, and now we're 24. I was a second grade classroom teacher for a long time. As my journey through the district started, about when I arrived over at Blockhouse Creek and had an opportunity to go to a required 4-day training with David Langford. And we were just beginning to pilot some of the skills and tools that some of our high school people had gone to and had learned. And we did a big training in a cafeteria. And it was really interesting, but it was still of the time where education was, wonder how long this is going to be here. Do we really have to do this? It doesn't make sense. We're going to give up all of our control. We're going to ask kids. They're going to ask us. It's not going to happen. And we'll just ride it out, and it too will be gone. But then that year, Eric became principal over at Blockhouse, who truly modeled from the beginning the tools analyzing data, questioning why do we do what we do. Not that why we do what we do is bad, but could we do it different? Could we do it better?
So we had to change a paradigm. The paradigm that we had started with was more of, well, there's a problem, let's have a 2-hour meeting and fix it, to, okay, we're going to identify what the critical problems are, and we're going to fully understand what the system is. We're going to fully understand where we want to end up, and then we're going to use tools together to figure out how to bridge the gap. So what are the things that we need to do then to get from our current reality to the vision that we're trying to create together? And so we started capturing those things. We didn't know exactly what we were doing, but let's use some of those tools. Let's learn together. Let's put it on the storyboard and continue this throughout the year. I was there for 3 years, so for 3 years we continued looking at processes and discovering together.
Over a period of time, talked to board members, talked to community members, and tried to highlight what they thought was wrong with the philosophy and how it was not in line with what they thought education should be. So we had kind of a divide in our school district. Most of our principals were pretty much on board, which was very helpful, and we had done even more education with our administrators, principals, and central office people, and so most of them were pretty much on board with what we were doing.
I don't want to change what I'm doing. I've been perfectly successful. And you're asking me to do something different. And just standing the ground and keep coming back. And that's what we did with the training, with the modeling, with giving that feedback that said, this is something that would be very easy for you to incorporate here and see how the students responded to it.
Over a period of time, over several years, we had David come in at least once a year and sometimes twice a year. And he would do 2 or 3, 4 days, and we would bring people in and began to get more and more converts. At the time, we had some board members, which I get to deal with, or got to deal with, who didn't agree with the process. We were going through debates about grading and how that should affect students and how we would go about it. And so we had on our board of trustees and in the community people who believed in the process, who thought it was a wonderful way for the school district to go, and people who really thought it was a bad thing. And over a period of years, that really kind of came to a head. I remember at one point we had teachers calling quality that Langford thing, and the Langford process, or they were putting it all on David and how he was trying to help us understand the philosophy of quality. And we had editorials in the newspaper about where we were going wrong and how this was destroying the educational system in our district. And so we went through a process of really some divisiveness in our district, where we kind of had to straddle the line and keep encouraging those people who had bought into the process, and yet trying to defend against those people who thought this was absolutely the wrong way to go. And that really kind of came to a head in that I basically fired David. at one point, I decided not to bring David back because he had become kind of the lightning rod that caused people to focus on what he was saying as something that was bad. At that time, we also quit using the term quality in education. We changed that to the term continuous improvement, because who could argue with continually improving? We had a pretty good cadre of people, especially administrators, and Monta and her staff, Anita Cotter, several principals, other people in our central administrative staff were pretty well educated in quality and continuous improvement. And so we kept moving along.
We had a high school senior English teacher say one time, who, by the way, was one of those who said, "This too shall pass, and it can't pass soon enough for me." And she went to the conference, and for some reason, she went into, I believe it was a session that had third graders in there teaching the teachers what they were doing. And she came out of that saying, "If third graders can do this, my seniors can." And she was off and running. But that was about 5 or 6 years down the road from when we started. So each in his own time. I can remember listening to David Langford over time as we worked with him, and I would get so upset with him because if he had just said that in the beginning, it would have made my life much easier. Of course, he had said it. I just wasn't ready to hear it in the context that I could put it into what I was doing every day. One of the biggest obstacles, barriers, opportunities, has been the growth that we've had. As we started out in a district that had, I believe by the time we began in continuous improvement, we had 6 campuses. And we were still a small family and knew each other and had been around each other. And so it was very easy to assimilate the new people coming in because we had such a strong core of the people who had been on the journey. And then all of a sudden, we began to open 2 campuses a year, and sometimes 3 every year. And that was a lot of new people coming into our district from all over. Now, many of them had heard of us, and they knew something was going to be different when they got here. But knowing that intellectually and feeling that in your core as to what I do with that and how different is it really, and what are the expectations that are different than what I'm used to, and what do you mean the superintendent's going to be with us here during this learning with our new staff for 2 days? He's going to teach us? That was a message in itself.
Yeah, the Leander way. And that was a term that actually took us a long way. And what it did was allowed us to present all of these guiding documents and the processes that we used to help people understand who we were and how we operated. And Monta brought up a very good point about the fact that, we would bring in 200, 250 new teachers every year. And what we learned early on is that you can't just bring those people in and throw them onto a campus and let everybody use what they think the organization is about to help enculturate them. So one of the things we did early on was made sure that we spent some time with those new people centrally to help them understand the overarching philosophy of the district and how we expected them to go about their daily activities and to educate kids. And in turn, what they could expect from us. So we spent some time with them trying to help them understand what the Leander Way was.
As I said, I've been in the district for a very long time, and I have seen the student enrollment grow from less than 2,000 students to over 30,000 students. And it's accelerated. So it has that, while it started off with some pretty steady growth, within the last 10 to 15 years, it's been exponential. That, and I think everybody has challenges. I mean, it's also a challenge if you have no growth and you're trying to improve a system. So everybody has their own challenges, and I think that's why the continuous improvement tools and strategies, rather than looking for a recipe approach, it gives you the tools to solve whatever problems you have. So I think the problems, probably the challenges that faced us, in addition to our changing different demographics, just rapidly trying to imagine bringing in, normally within the last, I would say, it's been pretty steady for about the last 5 years, we're bringing in 300 to 350 new teachers into our system every year. That's a huge influx of people who don't understand your culture, who don't have the background, and I think our early inclination was to try and cram 15 years of learning into their heads in 2 days, and of course that's highly effective in terms of just making everybody glassy-eyed and not being able to retain anything. So I think the guiding documents also helped us distill what's the most important thing that people new to our system need to walk out with. But growth in general, in the big scheme of things, has caused us to, I think, be more purposeful.
We had had this little family for a number of years, and we knew each other. We had built that trust, we had built that relationship, we had fun together, we learned together. But every year we were bringing this influx of new people who didn't know the language, who didn't understand what we were doing, even though they could recognize, even going through an interview, that there was something different here. And I think I want to be a part of it, but I don't know what it is. We approached that in several ways. With our new staff that we hired every year, we brought them in a week before everyone else reported back to work and went through a week of staff development, both in their campuses, in their departments, but mostly concentrating here on the campus and the educational part of it with our teachers.